Last, we come to the sixth effect, which is a combination of all the previous ones. Inevitably, heavy accounting losses end up appearing in the stages relatively more distant from consumption. Dear students, that is when the financial crisis hits, followed by an economic recession. It was the banks that granted the loans, and the value of the loans lies in the bank's assets. Now the market discovers that the vast majority of those investment projects are unviable and were undertaken in error. They are not generating profits. Therefore, banks' assets drop in value to a fraction of their former worth. Meanwhile, banks' liabilities, the deposits they created, remain the same. Overnight, it is discovered that the entire banking system is insolvent. It is bankrupt. That is what happened in the recent financial crisis. Note that the unfolding of events fits in perfectly with what we are explaining in theoretical terms, and a desperate effort had to be made to bail out the banks. The program in the United States provided $700 billion with which to buy toxic assets, that is, assets worth nothing, subprime mortgages, loans for unprofitable investment projects, etc. In Ireland, Portugal and Greece, all deposits were simply guaranteed, because if people had gone to withdraw their money and had found it missing, the monetary system would have collapsed and we would have gone back to the cave period. This brings us to the beginning of the economic recession. The market eventually reveals the grave entrepreneurial errors committed and the urgent need for restructuring. What does this mean? Well, first, entrepreneurs must halt unprofitable projects. Second, they must liquidate them, as with any investment project undertaken in error. Third, they must salvage whatever they can. Fourth, they must withdraw productive factors and labour from the stages far from consumption, where they were taken in error due to loans without real backing. And they must transfer these resources to stages closer to consumption, which is where consumers, economic agents, want them to be. A massive readjustment of the productive structure is necessary, and we now find ourselves in just such a process of readjustment. It is precisely what the economic recession or depression consists of. Take note. We have arrived at a recession because of a lack of real saved resources which would have permitted the completion of investment projects. To put it another way, we have arrived at a crisis because of overconsumption and insufficient saving with respect to the style of production used, which called for much more abundant available saving, when this did not exist. Everything was financed with the artificial speculative bubble of credit expansion. Some people say the crisis arose due to overinvestment. That is incorrect. Ultimately, we can invest only what we have saved. The crisis arose because we invested poorly. Society's scarce saved resources were invested as if we had saved much more. Do you remember when I gave the example of Robinson Crusoe? And I said it was essential that he be able to coordinate well the present with the future. I asked, what happens if he makes a mistake in calculation? And with his basket of 5 days' worth of saved berries, he tries to build a blast furnace. And everybody said, what madness! After 5 days, he has done no more than lay the foundations, his hands are bloody, and he goes back to being the poor Robinson Crusoe who gathers berries by hand. Perhaps he is even poorer than before, because now his hands are bloody. Despite the obvious differences, the same is happening now in an advanced economy impacted by credit expansion. We have unwisely invested society's scarce real resources in goods people do not want. As a result, we are poorer. 1 million apartments nobody wants have been built, and they are built because banks lowered interest rates, even to negative rates in real terms, and the apartments are already there and cannot be restructured. We are stuck with that iron, those bricks, etc. Those workers, who should have devoted their effort to profitable projects, have devoted it to unprofitable ones. There is a widespread process of malinvestment, and entrepreneurs have been deceived and drawn into it by the credit expansion of fractional reserve banking. Society's savings can be invested well or poorly. In a free market economy without credit expansion or privileges, etc., savings tend to be invested well. However, if the essential signs entrepreneurs receive are distorted, then for very prolonged periods of time, savings can be invested poorly, and sooner or later, the market, which is very efficient, detects that. The market discovers the malinvestment and puts the economy back on a sound footing, initially via a financial crisis and later an economic recession. Hayek and Mises each provide a very illustrative example. Mises says the current situation is very similar to that of a builder who, misjudging the amount of materials available to him, uses them up completely in laying a building's foundations and is forced to leave the building unfinished. Hayek talks about the imaginary inhabitants of a lost island who, having undertaken the construction of a huge machine capable of satisfying all the needs of the population, exhaust their savings and capital before finishing it, and have no choice but to temporarily abandon its construction. Well, that is precisely what happens in real terms in an economy distorted by credit expansion. In the end, what do we have once the 6 effects have appeared? A much flatter economy. Following the crisis, we have a productive structure in which, because more money has been injected and the proportion devoted to consumption remains the same, consumption is much greater in monetary terms. Consumption is 132 units, but there are only 5 stages, not the former 7. And what has happened to everything in stages 6 and 7, and to the widened portions of other stages? That has all disappeared, because it is not profitable, and the workers have lost their jobs. In Spain, for instance, 5 million people are out of work, because they are on their way, so to speak, to being redirected to profitable stages. That is why it is so important that the labour market be very free and flexible, so that the readjustment, which inevitably follows the error, is as fast and as painless as possible.